right, guys. Well, welcome to another episode of the Reintroduction Podcast. I'm here once again with the fantastic co-hosts Mina Swiris and Mina Murham. How you guys doing this evening?
Yes, sir.
Hi, hi.
What's up, babe? I'm currently very sad because the last dance is over, and that's been
Guys,
very. I don't know what to do with my Sunday anymore. There's no
guys,
church.
that
There's no Jordan. I don't know what else is there.
that ending was no joke.
Don't ruin
It
it because
was
I haven't watched it, please. I haven't watched the last
Mina.
two episodes.
Mina,
Spoiler
go
alert:
watch.
Jordan wins the
Go
championship.
go
Don't
watch
don't tell me what happens.
it.
Michael is the goat.
He is the GOAT. Although it was cool that they did the ESPN thing after, and they said that LeBron James, only 20% of people think that he is the greatest of all time. I don't think LeBron is even in the top two category. I think he's number three. Kobe's number two. So
Kobe for
I think this
life, bro.
conversation should be.
Mamba.
You're starting controversy outside of this podcast too, by the
I
way.
know. Anyway,
Everybody at
anyway,
Chris and tell him that no, it's not true.
I know. Listen, this is the difficult part of basketball. Everybody thinks that they know everything about who the greatest is, and the controversy is real. But anyway, onto a more controversial topic.
Right.
Yeah, just real
The
nice
the
and easy
sub,
going.
the subject matter that we're hoping to discuss today is God. Is it your way or mine?
Hmm.
And basically, the subtopic is are there many ways to God or one way? Because I think we live in a pretty inclusive world. We're really focused on inclusivity and not trying to focus on exclusivity. And a lot of people feel that religious exclusivity is dangerous and religion has led to untold strife, division, conflict, and it may be the greatest enemy of peace. So I want to open this up to you guys and tell me what your thoughts are about this idea of one way or many, or my way or your way, God. Let's what do you
The
guys think?
the first thing that came to mind when we proposed the topic was the story of Jim Jones, the guy who started his own cult in 1978 and like took everybody down to Guyana and started Jonestown, and how he, like, how we get the phrase he's drinking the Kool-Aid. That's basically where it comes from, is because he made 900 of his followers drink like a flavorful drink
Hmm.
and commit. It was like it had cyanide in it, and for all basically to commit mass suicide because of his word, and everyone believed in him, and whatever he said went. And that event in 1970, I think, shed a lot of light on what cults are and how cults can influence society and influence people who are vulnerable. And a lot of people have taken these ideas and have overgeneralized them on religions in general, and will say, you know what, is Christianity a cult? Is it exclusive by nature? Has it claimed rights on heaven and hell and on morality? And are we have the right to say which way is the way and which way is not the way? And that's basically the idea of us questioning everything that we hear. So that's the first thing that came to mind when we proposed that.
Jim Jones.
Jim
Jim
Jones.
Jones,
Jones.
Jonestown. Yeah, I think maybe similarly, Mina, like the idea of not just like a religion trying to claim exclusivity, but like an individual saying to you, forget like your way or God's way, like, but my way, I'm going to show you the way to God, right? And it's going to be
Yeah.
control you, control your behavior, and tell you to go, is me like dictating this answer, like this be all and end all kind of answer. So that was one thing that came to my mind, is like how somebody will manipulate that idea and say like I have all the collection of truth, so follow me. Or like to your other, I think the second half of your question, Chris, I feel like when a lot of people ask that question of like, oh, hasn't religion caused all kinds of problems and stuff like that? I feel like sometimes when you ask a question and you like believe your own question, you don't have to even go back and say like, is this even true? Is it true that the problem, all the wars in the world were started by religion? Is that even really a fact? Are you sure about that one? So I would want first, I'm going to bring that question back to you. Like, is that true? Like when you look back to all wars in the world and stuff, you say, the problem here, if there was no religion, like John Lennon said, just imagine there was no religion, and then things would be awesome. We would just be so much happier.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think historically, people have tried to do that. When you think of communist China, when you think of the Soviet Union, when you think of the variety of governments that have tried to eliminate religion, thinking that it would make and create more peace. And in reality, it doesn't. It actually creates more strife. And the areas where they've banned religion, religion has actually become more powerful, and it's grown and it's expanded because people have a longing to connect with their creator. Um, so I don't know. I don't know historically. I'd be interested in doing like a philosophical and historical check on that. But I don't. I would say at a first glance from things that I've read, I don't think there's any merit to that argument that religion has caused all the wars in the world. I think people have used religion as a means of causing strife in the world, but I don't think there's necessarily total merit to it. But I mean, why don't we go through that for a second? What do you guys think if we break that down even more? Let's go step by step. So I guess the first question is, do what do you guys think about this idea of religious exclusivity?
Yeah, and every religion, like pantheistic religions or Christianity or Islam or even atheists, in a way, have kind of formulated their own way and their own belief system into believing that this is what I personally need to do to be saved, or how I can live conflict free, or I can make things for me make sense. This is how the life for me makes sense, and everyone has to kind of answer four basic questions. And I think Ravi Zacharias is a Christian philosopher. He puts it this way: is that everyone has to be able to ask these four questions and be able to provide an answer for them. What is the origin of life? What's your origin? What is the meaning of life? What is your moral code? And what is your destiny? And we each, whether we grew up in a religious household or a non-religious household, we have to answer these questions for ourselves in order to figure out what like our life means and what it means beyond just what I've been taught.
Mm.
Um, I remember one of our friends, Manny. He always says this, like, what's the difference between you growing up in a Christian household? You grew up, you were born, your parents told you Christ is humanity and divinity, or Christ is God, and then you went to an institution, and that institution, the church, basically corroborated what your parents said. You said, you know what, that is, they stamped on it, and they said, you know what, yeah, that is God. You went on and you believed it, and you went on to live your life and ready to die for that religion based on what your parents and what this institution have said, as opposed to your neighbor who grew up in a Muslim household, who grew up having their parents say, you know what, God is this, and he also went to an institution that said God is that. They corroborated what his parents said, and he went out also to like live and practice out what he was taught. So why do we individuals then, how can we choose for ourselves what have been taught and passed down to us to make a way to forge for ourselves what we think is the way?
Mm. Yeah, and I think the question that we have to break down before we could even get to the way, right, is is there is there a reason why we have as Christians any merit to say that there is a way or one way? Like, do we have any merit to say that? Because I think many people listening to this may say, that's pretty grimy. You guys are so intolerant and you guys are so, and I think many Christians look around at their neighbors and say, surely that God can't be this ruthless to say only Christians, get to know him and only Christians can be with him for all eternity. So I think how do we break down that question for our listeners? Because I'm sure many of us have thought about that. So what do you guys think about? I mean, I love the direction that we're sort of thinking about. There's so many different things that we could be talking about, but if it's my way or your way, God, show us your way. Teach us how we can find you. Um, so what do you think, Merham?
Yeah, I think part of it too is the implicit idea of like even before you go into like which way of the several, you got to first answer that question like Mina's pointing us to, like is it my way or not, right? Because if I'm going to evaluate like claims of different people, that's one thing. Versus, but if I believe that I'm the standard, like all people that I've met in real life, like before when we were able to still speak to humans in real life, when we get into this discussion, the big question is like, okay, I want to treat this whole thing as like a buffet, right? I'm gonna take, Ellen said, be kind to one another. I like Ellen. Ellen's great, so I'm gonna do what Ellen said on that. Okay, this guy said, you should forgive people. Forgiveness is good. I'm gonna do that. But this guy said you should do this, and I'm not about to do that, so I'm just not gonna do that one, right? So at the end of the day, it feels like for me, the competition is not even between like different ideologies, but it starts with me saying like, I sort of have this all figured out and I'm going to buffet it, versus I'm going to suspend my own buffet and say, hold on a second. Like this, maybe I'll put it another way of like illness and medicine, right? This is the imagery that sometimes comes to my mind. So as you guys know, our good friend John is a cardiologist, right? If somebody has a cardiac problem and they come to me as a psychiatrist, I'm going to say, all right, tell me about like your mom. I mean, like, let's discuss that for a second. Lay down on the couch and tell me about your cardiac problem. They really need a cardiologist, right? If they come to me and they say, no, Mina, you will solve my problem, then I'm going to do them a disservice. They're going to do themselves a disservice, as opposed to them coming into a hospital and say, I have a problem, I'm sick. You guys figure out who is the specialist that can, solve my problem. So I think even before getting into the different ideologies, I question if honestly, like if you get real 100 here, if we sometimes get tripped up with just wanting to just make the decision kind of entirely based on our own, you know what I mean, like criteria for ourselves. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a really good point. Is the criteria subjective or is it objective?
Yeah.
Right? Is the criteria based on what I want God to be? So do I form God into my own image and likeness? A God who doesn't have any sort of idea of what he wants from his followers, a God that, sort of is molded to look like me in a lot of ways. Because I seem to have it all together all the time, right? Like
Right.
humans, their track
Especially
record is pretty good. Yeah, like our track record as humans is pretty awesome. We've always been peaceful. We've always been loving. We've always been tolerant. We've always accepted all people, all
Right.
religions, all races, all cultures. We tend to have a good track record as creating God in our own image and likeness. So I think that really is the question that I challenge all our listeners to ask. Is, do I want a God that looks like me, or do I want a God who has revealed himself to me and tells me who he says he is?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very vital point in the sense that, like, we're not qualified to talk about any other belief system. We're not even qualified to speak about Christianity. So.
We're just winging this one just because Monday night, there's no team sports.
Right.
Might as well talk about it.
So the main focus is, okay, morality sometimes is perceived as an in all, like be all when it comes to what we want out of religion, is that we want a moral code. And then all religions really provide that. And they're all fairly similar. If you look across, they all have fairly similar moral codes with like just small differences here and there. So if that were to be true, then you're stuck with thinking one of two things. Either all religions are equal, they're just doing their own thing, or there has to be something more than morality that has to dictate how we live our life and provide more meaning to the way we live our lives. And when we answer that question, we can say that we know that morality across the board is the same, but we don't know what other religions can offer, but we know what Christianity can offer that is more than morality. And maybe that's what we want to talk about in the person of Jesus himself. Why do we even as Christians say that Jesus is the way? What's so special about him? Why wouldn't you consider him someone who's crazy?
I think it's the hair mostly. That's primarily.
The hair is cool.
The beard.
The beard was exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great C.S. Lewis said it best. He said, you have three options to believe about Jesus. You have the option to believe that he's Lord. You have the option to believe that he's a liar. Or you have the option to believe that he's a lunatic. There's no real room to think otherwise. Because a lot of people say, I believe that Jesus is a good moral teacher. He was kind. He taught really great moral teachings.
Right.
But I don't like, anything else about him. But Christ made claims about being God. He told people that he was the way, the truth, and the life. So if he says these things, either he is Lord, either he's a liar, or he's a lunatic. He's a madman claiming that he's God. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, it begs the question, though, Chris, is like, let's say if I'm someone who I don't know all the claims that Jesus made, right? All I know is, like, Jesus probably said, turn the other cheek. That seems like a Jesus kind of thing to say, right? Jesus probably said, like, be nice to people because you should. Like, free hugs. I mean, that sounds like a very biblical thing, right? Like, if those are the things that I choose to believe about Jesus, so why are you pigeonholing him into like, oh, he said whatever? Maybe those things aren't true, right? Maybe the things that were true that Jesus said is just, just nice things.
Hmm.
What's with this all like really intense? I remember actually, you guys talked about like growing up even in a religious institution. One of the first things I remember hearing in church is somebody saying, isn't it interesting that Jesus never even said that he was God? And I was like, yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's true. That's very interesting. That sounds true. And then I really discovered that that's not the case. But like, I think a lot of people are walking around right now saying like, oh, Jesus never really said directly that he was God. Did he?
Hmm.
There is a lot of contrast. Obviously, we're not going to get into like the actual theological descriptions here, about the Son of God and the Son of Man and all the descriptions in the Gospel of John. But there's so much contrast in the life of Christ himself. Like if we take Christ as a historical figure himself, and we try to look at the narrative of his life, there's just so much that happened that doesn't make sense. The fact that like he would do everything that he has done in 3 years, the fact that only 18 days out of 3 years are the ones documented in the Gospels, and so much has happened, so many miracles that has happened in them. The fact that he can, go in one day be on a donkey being celebrated as king, and the same day he would be washing feet. The fact that he was so meek and lowly, but it speaks about coming on a cloud. The fact that he can make demons tremble, but be so relatable to kids. There's just the fact that he saved like everyone else, but when it came to himself, he didn't save himself. There's so many things about the character and the narrative of Jesus that don't make sense if he were to be a teacher. None of these things would make sense because all the other teachers who have lived never lived like that and never lived with such contrast, that to live as a humble servant to his creation, but to be the master that he is, all at the same time. It can only, like Chris said, either you have to believe he is God or you have to believe that he's crazy. One of the two things.
Well, some could argue, Mina, that Gandhi lived a really great, humble life. He fought for the rights of the least. He was a good man. He taught good teachings. He seemed to live very different than other people lived. So I don't know if that really a difference of lifestyle. Some people would say Muhammad lived a different lifestyle. Some people would say, whoever people believe in, they would say their founders lived differently than the rest of the world, and that's what caused people to follow them. But did Jesus actually make claims that he was God? And if he did make these claims, what are their implications on our life?
Yeah, I would say just without, like Mina said, without getting maybe into all the claims, but some of the ones that stick out to me, they don't stink at all. They're pretty good. Is at least when he's confronted with the issue, whether in a crowd of religious leaders and they say to him, "What's up, man? Who are you?" And he says, "I am." He says, "Ego and me." He says, "I am the great. I am the one that spoke to Moses. It's this guy right here." And they all knew what he was talking about, and they all picked up stones and were like, "That's it. That's the end of this guy." So there was no confusion at the time. Like the fact that we have this confusion now, the fact that this person who was like a teacher in church told me he was confused about it, he might be confused about it. I might be confused about it. But at that point, there was no confusion. It was clear as day. Everybody's getting ready to murder this guy and ultimately did murder him because he's saying these either blasphemous things of saying, "I am the great I am, ego and me," or another even smaller examples of like one-on-one with a lady at the water cooler and she's saying, "We're waiting for the Messiah." And he says, "I'm the Messiah. I am. I'm the Messiah. The one you're waiting for is me." So he puts it to you in this like fork in the road. And I like to always, like one of my favorite things to talk about, two things. One maybe is like the passage in the Gospel of John about Jesus saying these things. The other is, another sacred saying from Jay-Z, who says, there's got to be a hip hop reference in every episode, just so people can make fun of me. He says, I drove by the fork in the road and went straight, right? And Mr. J / Mr. Z, if you drive by a fork in the road and you go straight, you hit a tree. Like you just, you know what I mean? You can't. And Jesus, what he did in these claims, he said, there's a fork in the road. He said, "I am the Messiah. I am the one you're waiting for." So you can either say no or you say yes, but you can't say maybe. You can't. It's like bubbling in another answer on a Scantron. It's just, you ain't going to get no credit for that one. right? So at least putting to bed the idea of, did he really say it? Did he really mean it? Unquestionable.
Okay, so Mina Suiris, Mina Merham, you both are saying that he made it very clear about the nature of who he is.
Crystal.
Crystal?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so if he made it crystal clear that he was God, and that he was the way, and that he was the truth, and that he is the life in John 14:16, and he says, no one comes to the Father except through me, what are the implications on our lives? Like, what? Okay, cool. Anyone can make these claims that he's God, but does it actually, how do we know that he was telling the truth, first and foremost? And what are the implications on our life?
Yeah, I think the first point to the first question is that what are the implications on my life, especially for someone who doesn't really believe, and someone who lives a good life, someone who's lived a successful life, is married, he doesn't cheat on his wife, doesn't cheat on his taxes, does well, volunteers once a week. So why why do I need Jesus? Like
Right,
why,
right.
right? So it doesn't make sense. And from that standpoint, is that if you can, and it's one of the things that Jesus himself pointed out, is that no matter how righteous, no matter how good things you have been doing, the heart of man is wicked. And if you sink deep into your heart, every one of us will come up with a list of, things that they would die before they can reveal it to other people. And that in itself reflects a problem with mankind that is not resolved by morality, is not resolved by volunteering or doing good things, because inherently the heart of man has been corrupted. And there's a problem with it, no matter how seemingly your life seems to be normal and you're doing good things with it. And Christ himself answers that like head on. And he says, morality is only going to take you to a certain extent. Doing good things is going to take you to a certain extent. But in this situation, you need truth, and truth in Christianity is exemplified and manifested in the person of Christ himself. It is not in the moral belief system. So that's the first point that I would take with this, is that Christ himself is truth.
Yeah, and I would agree with that in terms of like the implications for me. I'm thinking in my own life. Like, what do I really need, right? Like, I remember hearing this lyric again from another person that I listened to, a Christian guy this time. He says this sin sickness is in us, right? It's different from hearing that like you have a transient or something that comes and goes, and you need someone to like help you live life a little bit differently. That's one thing, like cherry on top kind of behavior modification, versus knowing that no, you have a deep seated illness, cancerous kind of thing going through all your body, and you need like radical surgical intervention, right? For me personally, the implication on the person of Jesus, knowing that I can believe what he's saying because of the resurrection from the dead, right? And we talked about that a little bit in the resurrection episode. If you missed it, go back and check out our, episode 3. Thank you, Chris, right? So if you already heard that episode, you know that we went through, wow, he resurrected from the dead. Different. Nobody else can say that. Nobody else can say, I died, came back again. I'm going to tell you how life is like on the other side. But then being able to say, while I'm dead in my sin, right? Like St. Paul says, while I'm dead in everything I'm doing, just total deadness. Like we hear in that beautiful passage in Ezekiel, where Ezekiel walks into like a field of dry bones, like, and breathes life into a field of people who are just bones. In my life, what I experienced firsthand is knowing that my life was like a field of bones. Things were just dead and decrepit and just funky and like nasty. And the person of Jesus made a transformation in those things. And that for me was more powerful than just an idea or a philosophy or a thought. It's the reason we would spend the Monday night talking about it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's both of you said some really powerful stuff there. I think every religion has someone saying, "I'm coming to you to show you where God is." But in Christianity, God says, "No, I'm coming. I am God, and I'm coming to find you."
Right.
So the paradigm shifts. Like, Jesus is coming to find us. Jesus is coming to live with us, to walk with us, to experience, what we're experiencing, to heal the brokenness that you both just talked about, the wickedness that's within us. There's an old quote from a church father that says, that which he has assumed is that which he has healed. So he
Saint
comes
Gregory.
he comes and he assumes. Saint Irenaeus says it too. We assume he assumes our nature in order to heal it. And the question that we have to ask ourselves and all of our listeners is, if there is a quick if there is a clear differentiation that Jesus makes about himself, how do I want to perceive him? Do I want to perceive him as Lord, or do I want to perceive him as a liar, or do I want to perceive him as a lunatic? Like we've said earlier, we can shape him into the way that we want to shape him, but the reality is, what are the implications of him on my life personally? And if we haven't had any experiences with him personally, that's what we have to sort of search and dig in deeper into. So I guess my question for you guys is, since we've dug pretty deep, is what about those who say it just seems unfair? It's what about like those who weren't born into Christian families? What about those who never heard the message of the gospel? What about those who, because I'm sure many people are listening to this and saying it just seems too exclusive. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and that's basically a very pivotal point. And it's not just we take it and we can generalize it to people who believe that, what if like kids are born and they die before they're baptized, and like it's the question is too broad. But the simple answer to it is that if we can look in deep into ourselves, and we can say that our hearts break for someone who never gets the chance to get to know God in a way that we have experienced him, then there's no way God himself is going to say, yeah, sorry buddy, you missed out. I like no one came to preach my name to you, then yeah, in the next life you'll get it. That
You're
doesn't work
beat.
like,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're
So
you're beat.
Sucks for you, bro.
I think for our purposes is that we do not in any way, like I can say it this way: we can limit the sacrament to God, but we cannot limit God to the sacrament. We can say in what we believe, this is what we've been taught and this is what we've been passed down, but we can never say that God has no choice into accepting more or going outside of what he has told us to accept. Others, just like pretty much just like a teacher who is giving an exam, and you can say, you know what, like it says the exam is on Monday, and someone comes to ask me, hey, when is the exam? I can tell them that the teacher told me the exam is on Monday. They can ask me, well, will God make an exception for me? Or will the teacher make an exception for me? Sure. But he can do that, not me. I can't speak on his behalf and say yes or no. It's not for me to even be part of this conversation.
Yeah,
God is going to make himself known to that person and have him experience him in ways beyond just the confines of religiosity. In so many ways, you can find that God has made himself and revealed himself to people who are living Christians, and they haven't gotten a chance to know Christianity in the way that we know it.
Yeah, and to that point, Mina, so I'll share a little account one time. One time I was having a chat with like an older mentor, and I said to him, "Listen, man, um, I'm done giving talks in church. I retire. I'm gonna hang up my pulpit like microphone." And he was like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, we wouldn't miss anything. You're not that good anyway. But why are you gonna stop?" I said, "Well, I just don't want to preach to the choir anymore. I'm tired of just telling people who are supposed to already know stuff." And he was like, "Let me ask you a question. Like, do you think you were part of the choir? Like somebody preached to you and you were in church and you were clueless. You had no idea what was going on." And I said, "That's a good point. I'm gonna keep doing it." Because here's a little side note. I know we're worried about like, oh, what about the person who grew up in the jungle or like never heard about whatever? Just hear me for a second here, Mr. Viewer, Mrs. Viewer that's listening to this maybe for the first time. Just because you were born into whatever faith doesn't mean that you have any automatic nothing. There is no birthright to faith. There is no, oh, I inherited this. It's part of my DNA. Nobody gets it in their DNA. Nobody gets this automatically. And Jesus was very, very clear. There are people that are going to be like, "Oh, remember Jesus? We were all about it." And he's like, "I don't recognize you. You don't look familiar. I don't know what you're talking about. I never knew you." So I agree with Mina 100%. Like at the end of the day, like God's judgment to people everywhere, we have no idea, right? God is the ultimate merciful judge, and His love is beyond searching out. But I like get even more worked up to people that I know are right here, right walking around with full access to God, and almost trip over Him and say like, "Man, I wonder who this Jesus guy is."
hmm. I heard this interesting story before, and it was a story about blind men and an elephant.
Mm.
So there was a bunch of blind men, and they were talking along, and they came upon this elephant, and they were allowed to touch it and feel it. And one described it as the creature is long and flexible like a snake. The other described it not at all. It's thick and round like a tree trunk. The first one was describing the trunk, or the second was describing the trunk. The first was describing, the leg, and the third one came along and said, "No, it's large and flat, touching the elephant's side." So each blind man could only feel a part of the elephant. None could envision the entire elephant. And that's the argument that a lot of people make about everybody's really pointing and getting a feel of the actual elephant. But the illustration backfires because the story is told from the point of view of somebody who is blind, right? But what about the person who tells it that can see the whole elephant?
Right.
Like he sees the whole elephant, and you can't see, you only see the entirety of the elephant if you yourself have seen an elephant before. So the three blind men don't know, but those who can step back and see the whole picture see the entirety of it. And this illustration is really powerful for me because I think all of us have a choice in this journey to knowing God. We have the choice to make God in our own image and likeness. We have the choice to not search for truth and accept that which we have received but never actually believed it. Like there are some people that learn things and memorize it and recite it, not ever experiencing it. That's the people that know about God but don't know God. And then there's a third reality, which is I can create God in my image. I can search for God and create and know about him. And then there's the third person who actually searches for God, knows him, and finds the truth about who he says that he is. I think for all of us that are on this, we've all individually, like I remember my journey of coming to know God was really a powerful one. It was first year of college, Professor Kelly philosophy class,
My
where he
man.
basically rocked everything that I once knew about God. I went home, and that semester I read 17 books in search for truth. I'll never forget it. It was the most powerful journey that I ever had. So I would encourage our listeners, Christianity is not about an exclusive group. Christianity is about searching for truth. And if Jesus says that he's the way, the truth, and the life, he's either a God or he's a phony. And there's
Yeah.
really no room in between.
But Chris, I want to clarify also that point is that when we speak about when Jesus says, I am the truth, or when Jesus says, I am the way, we're really not talking about Jesus saying that you have to follow the Christian moral code in order to accept Jesus as the way. Basically, he's saying that I have, as God, I've perceived the heart of man. I've seen how difficult life is, and I don't want you to do it alone because you can't do it alone. You'll fail. I'm the way because I am willing to come to be your companion, to be the one walking beside you on the road so that we can do this life thing together. And that's what makes Jesus the way, not that he's saying abide by this moral code only, and when you abide by it, then you'll be saved, because that's out of the point. The point is morality is only part of it. And everyone who's listening to this, if you're Christian or if you don't believe in religion, you should ask yourself, what am I getting out of life besides a good moral code, besides being a good moral person? And whatever you believe in has to be able to answer that question. And if it doesn't, you should be able to step back and say, okay, something is missing. Like when we speak about and reflect on the main issues of life, love, evil, forgiveness, and justice, all these things Christians are able to answer in the person of Christ, in the incarnation, the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ. Like we can come to it. And then Christ himself has become a friend. Like no religion or no like belief system has dared to take God down from his throne and put him down as a friend. It's like if you Google this icon, it's like a Coptic icon called Friendship with Jesus, I think. And it's like Jesus and this abbot, and you see that Jesus walking next to this guy and he has his arm around him. No one dares to picture God in this way unless God himself has told you, I am your friend. And that's what makes this being, when God says, I am the truth, it's not just God saying, screw everybody else. If you don't listen to me, you're not saved. No, he's saying, you can't do this without me. Not because like I'm here and you're here. No, because I love you. It's meant to be this way. It's meant for us to do it together. because when he came to save us, he saved everyone, not just Christians.
Yeah.
Right. That's powerful, because I think like in the same breath, Jesus' friendship with us and Jesus' full experience of the human life, right? Like when St. Paul tells us that he really became like us in everything except for sin alone in Hebrews, right? Like that, again, like there's no one else who can make that claim of God being able to suffer with you, right? And now we're in the middle of all this COVID stuff, and then we have this bold claim of Jesus saying, like you're saying, not from like long distance, sending you an email telling you I'm the way. That would be so cold and so annoying. Follow me, I'm the truth. Reply all. No, he's like in the trenches, suffering with, rejoicing with, like being fully in it with us. And I think for us, that's what winds up. That's the most imprinting kind of experience, is that I know I can point to times in my life where Jesus suffered with me, where Jesus rejoiced with me, where Jesus was a friend with me. Like he, in him, all things consist. Right. This idea, that's this truth from Saint Irenaeus, and that's explained in Colossians, like, is what it's all about. It's not just him delivering a long distance message. And I think that's what's been so powerful. And I agree totally. And I think it's worth underscoring, is that he's not talking about doing this and coming for one type of people or one type of person. This is freely, the gift freely offered to everybody.
So it's a gift that's freely offered to everybody. So that makes it inclusive of all.
That's right.
So there is no exclusive club of people that have access to Christ. All of us have access to him. All of us have access to God through him. And I would encourage all of our listeners, to dig deep into this question, to research, to investigate, and for main takeaways for us, either Jesus is God or phony. And if he is who he says he is, then he's not making truth subjective. He's making truth very objective. And we're not saying that to cast a judgment on anyone that's outside of Jesus. We're just saying that we know that God came to journey with us and to take us to him. And the reality is it your way or his way? That's the subject of this whole conversation, right? Is it your way? Is it your way to God, or is it God's way to God? And he's made it clear and revealed it to us. So we have some additional resources that we'd encourage you guys to look into. There are a few books that we recommend, which is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis goes through a pretty powerful step-by-step process discussing this particular subject. There's another book called Jesus Among Other Gods by Ravi Zacharias. And there's also a book which we mentioned earlier on in episode 3 about the resurrection, which is called The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. We'd encourage our listeners, this is not about us trying to, cast judgment on anyone. We are just trying to have an honest, candid conversation about the truth of who God is, and encourage you guys to all have these conversations amongst each other, and dig into the reality of who God is, because the misconception that we have that he's not inclusive is just false. He's inclusive to all people. So any closing thoughts, guys?
Yeah, that's it. Like the one you ended with is that he came for all, and you will find him everywhere you look for him. If you are looking for more than just following morality, you will find him. There's no other way.
That's right. I will tell you, we find him and you'll be found by him, because he's running around chasing. The last thing I'll say is there's a beautiful U2 line. It says, "I have a brother," speaking about Jesus, I spend my whole time running, and he spends his running after me. Right. Mm-hmm. That's the imagery that we have of Jesus, is just chasing us like marathon level all day, every day. That's the kind of truth that we believe in.
Amen. All right, guys. Well, thank you for another fantastic episode. We look forward to seeing you guys next week in episode 8 of the Reintroduction Podcast. And if you guys have not caught up on old episodes, episode 1 through 6 is live on YouTube, on Spotify, and every podcast platform. Check it out. We'd love for you to give us some feedback on reintroductionpodcast@gmail.com or reintroductionpodcast.com, where you can get some more information about who we are and this podcast. Thank you guys very much for tuning in to another week, and we'll see you guys soon.
Good to see you guys.
Deuces.
Peace.
Peace.